They told you to clean your desk, stop talking to yourself, quit staying up so late, and take life more seriously. They mistook your chaos for laziness, your solitude for antisocial behavior, your questions for defiance, and your silence for emptiness. But what if everything they criticized was never a flaw? What if it was your mind trying to protect something rare, something most people spend a lifetime trying to hide or silence? Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But to do that, your mind must often rebel against the rigid shapes society tries to force you into. You see, for decades, psychology has tried to measure intelligence. IQ tests, standardized exams, academic milestones. But those are just yardsticks for conformity. They measure how well you play the game, not whether you can rewrite it. Because real intelligence doesn't always sit still, it doesn't always wear a suit, and it certainly doesn't always raise its hand in class. Sometimes it's hidden in messy rooms and restless nights. It whispers through inner dialogue and doodles in the margins. It lurks behind sarcasm, dark humor, and quiet rebellion. These aren't random quirks, they're clues. They are the fingerprints of a different kind of mind, one that is intuitive, flexible, non-linear, and often misunderstood. Today, we're going to peel back the curtain on everyday behaviors most people overlook, and show you how they may actually be signs of high intelligence. Not the kind that memorizes facts, but the kind that bends reality, challenges norms, and sees patterns in places others miss. Let's start with the one that drives teachers, parents, and partners absolutely mad. 1. Messy desk, brilliant mind. They say a cluttered desk is a sign of a cluttered mind. But what if that clutter is actually intelligence in motion? In a fascinating 2013 study by the University of Minnesota, researchers found that people who work in messy environments tend to be more creative, more imaginative, and more likely to generate original ideas. The chaos didn't stifle them, it stirred something alive. This is because their minds aren't fixated on surface order. They're not enslaved to the illusion of control. Instead, they are attuned to something far deeper, the wild, instinctive current of unconscious thought, what Carl Jung would call the fertile chaos of the psyche. Jung once wrote, "Order is not enough. You also need disorder. With it comes growth, imagination, and renewal." To the untrained eye, a messy desk looks like a failure of discipline. But through the lens of depth psychology, it may signal a different kind of order. The intuitive dance between conscious tasks and unconscious creativity. It's the kind of environment where the ego loosens its grip and the deeper mind begins to speak. The stack of half-read books, the scribbled notes, the coffee-stained pages, they're not distractions. They're breadcrumbs from the unconscious. Each one hints at a mind that doesn't just follow instructions, but explores patterns, questions rules, and makes connections others overlook. In Jungian terms, these are people tapping into the active imagination, that liminal space between order and dream, where original thought is born. So the next time someone scoffs and says, "You live like a tornado," just smile, because they're mistaking the storm for dysfunction. And you know the truth, you are not disorganized. You are building meaning out of madness. You are not scattered. You are non-linear. You are not failing to clean up. You are busy creating a world that doesn't exist yet, except in your mind. Brilliance, after all, has never looked tidy. 2. Dark humor, sharp mind. You ever meet someone who laughs at the darkest, most twisted things? Not out of malice, but with a strange intelligence that cuts through the heaviness like a blade. It's not just comedy, it's complexity. A study published in Cognitive Processing revealed something fascinating. People who appreciate dark humor tend to score higher in both verbal and non-verbal intelligence. That's not accidental. That's a neurological fingerprint of someone operating beyond the surface of life. Because here's the truth. Dark humor is layered. It's not just about laughing at something taboo. It's about being able to hold two opposing truths at the same time, pain and irony, despair and absurdity, and still find a thread of insight in it. This isn't the humor of the shallow or insensitive. This is the humor of the soul that has been through something and lived to tell the joke. Carl Jung once wrote, "Even a happy life cannot be without a measure of darkness, and the word happy would lose its meaning if it were not balanced by sadness." Dark humor, then, is the psyche's secret balancing act. It's the subconscious turning trauma into punchlines. It's shadow work wearing a jester's mask. To find comedy in the chaos, that's not dysfunction. That's a deeper form of adaptation. It means your mind has developed the flexibility to cognitively reframe tragedy, and your emotional system can hold pain without becoming consumed by it. Jung would call this a form of individuation, where the shadow is not suppressed but integrated. And that integration shows up not just in therapy or dreams, but sometimes in what makes us laugh. So if you've ever giggled at something inappropriate, not because you're cold, but because you see the irony, the human fragility, the mirror in the madness, know this. You're not broken, you're not a bad person. You are metabolizing reality through a higher form of psychological digestion. Because dark humor isn't just edgy, it's the laughter of a mind that has learned to sit beside pain and not flinch. That's not weakness, that's power. 3 Worriers Are Wiser. And here's the deeper reason why. Let's revisit something you've probably heard your whole life. Stop overthinking. You worry too much. You're being too sensitive. But what if I told you that the very thing you've been told to suppress, your constant worrying, your anxious rehearsals of what could go wrong, is actually a high-level form of cognition? According to a study at SUNY Downstate Medical Center, people who reported higher levels of chronic anxiety also scored significantly higher on verbal intelligence tests. That's not a coincidence. That's pattern recognition, sharpened to a fine point. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Now pause. Let that sit. Because for many worriers, their overthinking is really their unconscious mind trying to speak, trying to bring clarity to what lies beneath the surface. Their mind is not broken, it's alert, sensitive, hyper-attuned. Worry isn't just fear, it's simulation. It's your brain running mental rehearsals like a master strategist, playing out potential futures so you're never caught off guard. It's your intuitive system scanning the landscape over and over again because you sense things before others do. Jung called this the function of intuition, an inner compass that doesn't rely on logic or the 5 senses, but something deeper, something older, and yes, something more exhausting. If you've ever laid awake at night, obsessing over what someone said, imagining scenarios that may never happen, catastrophizing outcomes you can't control, what if that wasn't a flaw? What if that was your psyche refusing to settle for a shallow understanding of life? You're not just reacting, you're anticipating. You're not just feeling, you're decoding. There's a kind of genius in anxiety when viewed through the Jungian lens. Because the anxious mind is often the awakened mind, too open to ignore the patterns, too curious to trust the surface, too complex to ever feel fully at ease. And what the world dismisses as paralysis by analysis might just be the gift of depth perception. So the next time someone tells you to just stop thinking so much, smile, because they're telling you to shut off the very mechanism that sees further, feels deeper, and prepares more thoroughly than most people ever will. Your anxiety might not be the problem. It might be the evidence that your mind is already working ahead of schedule. 4. Doodling unlocks brains. Have you ever caught yourself absent-mindedly drawing spirals, shapes, or abstract patterns in the margins of your notebook, only to feel guilty afterward, as if you weren't really paying attention? Here's the truth. You weren't distracted. You were engaged, just not in the conventional way society rewards. Modern psychology confirms it. A study from the University of Plymouth revealed that people who doodled while listening to a monotonous task retained nearly 30% more information than those who didn't. Why? Because doodling occupies just enough of your brain to keep it from wandering off into full-blown daydreaming, a cognitive sweet spot of light focus. But Jung would take it even deeper. Carl Jung believed that symbols, especially spontaneous ones, are the language of the unconscious. He often encouraged patients to draw, not as art, but as revelation. The creation of something new, Jung wrote, is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct acting from inner necessity. That squiggle you drew while someone droned on about quarterly reports? It may be your unconscious speaking, not in words, but in lines, in loops, in impulses your rational mind hasn't caught up with yet. Jung knew the psyche doesn't only speak in language, it speaks in images. And doodling, far from a distraction, may actually be a form of dialogue with your deeper self. Children doodle freely, prisoners doodle on walls, dreamers doodle in class, and the most brilliant minds often leave behind notebooks filled not with lines of logic, but with margins bursting with sketches, diagrams, and symbols. So if your pages are littered with arrows, boxes, mazes, eyes, or meaningless shapes, don't erase them. They're echoes of attention, of aliveness, of an inner mind that refuses to go numb. In a world obsessed with straight lines, perhaps your squiggles are signs that your intelligence curves, not just upward, but inward. 5. Night Owl's Rule. If your mind lights up when the world goes dark, you're not dysfunctional, you're dancing with your own unconscious. There's a reason why some of the most brilliant minds in history worked long after midnight. The quiet hours are not empty, they're sacred. Jung believed that the unconscious speaks most clearly when the noise of the outer world fades. And that's silence. That's when the soul whispers. Studies from the London School of Economics have shown that night owls tend to score higher on measures of abstract reasoning and cognitive complexity. But that only scratches the surface. This is not just about intelligence, it's about inner architecture. Late-night minds are often built differently, more introverted, more open to experience, more attuned to the symbolic and the surreal. They explore not because the sun is gone, but because the veil is lifted. They write, reflect, paint, build, wander, because nighttime offers what the daytime never could: the absence of interruption, the presence of depth. A Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." For night owls, those 2 a.m. hours are not rebellion, they are awakening. Not in a loud, ambitious way, but in a deep, quiet revolution of thought. You are not broken for craving the night. You're simply connected to a rhythm that moves beneath the surface of this fast, noisy world. A rhythm that pulses with intuition, introspection, and insight. You don't need to fit into a 9-to-5 mold to be valid. You are a creature of the void, and in that void, you find your voice. 6. Self-talk superpowers. Ever find yourself muttering through a problem out loud, replaying conversations in the car like you're on a stage, whispering your own name in moments of crisis? That's not madness, that's mastery. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." And self-talk, real, raw, audible self-talk, is one of the most overlooked gateways into awakening. Because when you speak to yourself, you aren't just organizing your day, you're confronting your shadow. You're becoming your own therapist, guide, and challenger. You're making the unconscious conscious in real time. Psychologist Dr. Linda Saperdine notes that speaking your inner dialogue out loud helps structure cognition and emotional regulation. But Jung takes it further. Self-talk is a dialogue between the ego and the self, between who you think you are and who you truly are, buried beneath layers of conditioning. This is why some of the sharpest thinkers, leaders, and creatives on the planet are known to talk to themselves. It's not about sounding sane to others. It's about being sane with yourself. Athletes do it to focus. CEOs do it to make high-stakes decisions. Visionaries do it because the voice they trust the most is their own. When your inner world is alive, aware, and fully engaged, it doesn't stay silent. It speaks, loudly, often, and purposefully. So the next time you catch yourself narrating your life like a documentary, don't shut it down. Lean in. That voice isn't noise. It's intelligence echoing back at you, layered, self-aware, and sharper than most people realize. And maybe, just maybe, that voice is the part of you you've been trying to meet all along. 7. Smart laziness wins. Let's get honest. Highly intelligent people are often misjudged as lazy because they don't always move fast, speak loudly, or burn themselves out in the name of hustle. But what if what looks like laziness is actually deep inner alignment? Carl Jung taught that the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent. That burden often includes the unconscious pressure to perform, to be efficient, to always be busy, even when the soul is crying out for stillness. The so-called lazy, intelligent person often isn't avoiding responsibility. They're avoiding meaningless busyness. They refuse to waste life on motions that have no soul in them. They're not trying to escape effort. They're redesigning effort. This is smart laziness. It's the ability to recognize inefficiencies at a glance, question routines others blindly follow, and intuitively sense when to act and when to wait. It's the rebellious intelligence that sees the system and quietly rewrites it. Bill Gates once said he'd choose a lazy person to do a hard job because they'll find an easy way to do it. But what he's describing isn't laziness. It's psychological leverage. It's insight over inertia, strategy over suffering. And here's the Jungian twist. This smart laziness often arises after facing your own shadow, after confronting the internal drive to be useful at all costs. The moment you stop outsourcing your worth to how busy you look, something powerful awakens. Inaction becomes contemplation, silence becomes synthesis, rest becomes rebellion. You begin to sense, not every mountain needs climbing, not every hour needs filling. The most brilliant solutions often emerge not in motion, but in the pause. So the next time someone calls you lazy, ask yourself this: am I avoiding life, or am I finally living on my terms? Because smart laziness isn't the absence of effort, it's the mastery of it. 8. Smart rebels break norms. If you've never truly fit in, not at school, not in church, not in your family, that's not dysfunction, that's divergence. And divergence is often the birthplace of genius. Carl Jung once said, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases." This isn't just a poetic line, it's a psychological truth. Systems, traditions, and social norms are designed for the masses, not the individual soul. And if you've always found them confining, rigid, or shallow, it may be because your mind sees farther than most. True intelligence doesn't just absorb information, it interrogates it. It asks, why should I do it this way? Who decided this was normal? What if the truth lies outside the rules? Rebels aren't just defiant for the sake of drama. They're often guided by a strong inner compass, what Jung would call the self, the totality of your psyche trying to individuate, to separate from the collective, to become whole. This is why intelligent people often struggle with blind obedience or cultural scripts, because conformity feels like self-betrayal. So if you've always felt friction with tradition, if your ideas have been labeled too much, too idealistic, or too strange, take heart. That's often the loneliness of originality. Many of the greatest thinkers in history were misunderstood in their own time, not because they were wrong, but because they were early. To question is not to destroy, it is to evolve. Jung called this the path of individuation, the sacred journey of breaking from the crowd to become fully, authentically yourself. That path can look like rebellion to others, but to the self-aware mind, it is growth. It is psychological sovereignty. So don't shrink to fit. Don't contort your genius into palatable silence. Remember, if you've been told you're too intense, too curious, or too critical, maybe you're not too much. Maybe you're just too awake. 9 brains decode clues. Some forms of intelligence are invisible, not because they don't exist, but because they operate in realms most people never pay attention to. Pattern recognition isn't just a cognitive skill, it's a deep psychological attunement to reality's undercurrent. It's the ability to read between the lines, to feel the shape of truth in the fog of noise. Carl Jung called this the perception of the unconscious. He believed that highly intuitive minds are not just rational thinkers, they are symbolic interpreters. They feel when something's off before it can be explained. They notice when someone's words contradict their body. They detect meaning in moments others call meaningless. This kind of intelligence rarely shows up on test scores, but it shows up in life, in how these individuals navigate people, chaos, uncertainty. They catch the flicker of anxiety behind a smile. They hear silence like it's a sentence. They recognize that everything, from a delay in response to a repeated phrase, has significance. Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." But the ones who decode clues, they do both. They listen outwardly with eyes open and inwardly with soul tuned. These are the people who know when the room has shifted before anyone speaks. Who sense that someone's hurting, not because it was said, but because it was buried. Who can read a situation like it's a language made of energy. This is not superstition. It's not guesswork. It's the language of the unconscious, and intelligent minds speak it fluently, even when they don't know how or why. So if you've ever felt like you're always reading too much into things, maybe you're not. Maybe your brain is just doing what evolved, intuitive, high-functioning minds do. It's seeing what others are too busy, too distracted, or too surface level to perceive. And that, in today's noisy world, is a superpower. So the next time you catch yourself overthinking, staying up too late, doodling in the margins, laughing at something no one else finds funny, pause. That's not dysfunction. That's not laziness. That's not weirdness. That might be brilliance. The world has spent decades trying to package intelligence into numbers, scores, and rigid systems. But the truth is, the most powerful minds often look nothing like what we expect. They're messy. They're curious. They talk to themselves. They break rules without shouting. They feel deeply, notice subtly, and question instinctively. Carl Jung taught us that true wisdom often lies in the places we reject, in the shadows, in the unconscious, in the overlooked patterns of our daily behavior. Intelligence is not just how fast you solve a problem. It's how deeply you understand the problem's context. It's how well you know yourself while moving through a noisy, surface-level world. You are not behind. You are not broken. You may just be wired for deeper things. So own the way your mind works, even if no one else claps for it, even if the world calls it strange. Because real intelligence is rarely loud, but it's always present, watching, feeling, learning, and rising when the world finally quiets down enough to notice.